On the morning of December 31st, 1941, a new admiral took command of the United States Pacific Fleet on the deck of a submarine. Not because tradition required it, because every battleship in Pearl Harbor was either sunk, capsized, or burning. That admiral had been chosen by Franklin Roosevelt over 28 officers senior to him on the seniority list. Most of Washington thought it was a mistake. This is the story of why Roosevelt was right and what it cost the man he chose. 24 days earlier, the Pacific had been at peace. Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. The harbor is quiet. Pearl Harbor sleeps under a sky so blue it looks painted. White hulls rest at anchor along Battleship Row. Sailors in dress whites file toward Sunday breakfast. Somewhere on the USS Nevada, the band tunes up for morning colors. Then the sky changes. At 7:55 in the morning, the first wave arrives. 183 Japanese aircraft, torpedo bombers skimming the water. Dive bombers screaming down from 6,000 feet, fighters strafing the airfields at Wheeler, at Hickam, at Ford Island. On the USS Arizona, a single armor-piercing bomb finds the forward magazine. The detonation lifts the bow of a battleship out of the water. A column of fire rises 400 feet into the sky. In an instant, 1,177 men are gone. Beside her, the USS Oklahoma takes at least 5 torpedoes in 12 minutes. She rolls onto her side. Her mast strikes the harbor bottom. 429 men are trapped inside her hull. Some will hammer on the steel for 2 days before the sounds finally stop. By 10 o'clock, the second wave departs. 2 hours of war. The Pacific Fleet is in ruins. 2,403 Americans are dead. 7 battleships lie sunk, burning, or shattered. The California, the West Virginia, the Nevada, the flagship Pennsylvania, mauled in dry dock, the Maryland and the Tennessee wedged in the wreckage of the others. But in the smoke and the burning oil, the Japanese have missed something. 3 aircraft carriers are not in the harbor. The Enterprise is at sea delivering planes to Wake Island. The Lexington is ferrying aircraft toward Midway. The Saratoga sits quietly in San Diego, 2,500 miles away. The battleships are gone. The carriers survive. In that single fact, history has already turned. The men in Pearl Harbor cannot see it yet. The man who will turn it does not yet know he is the man. He is sitting at a desk in Washington. His name is Chester William Nimitz. He is 56 years old, a rear admiral with 2 stars on his collar. The son of a German immigrant family from Fredericksburg, deep in the hill country of central Texas, a town where the boy named Chester had never seen the ocean until he was almost grown. His job on the morning of December 7th is paperwork. He runs the Bureau of Navigation. In the United States Navy of 1941, that means he is in charge of personnel. Every promotion, every transfer, every assignment, the names, the ranks, the careers, 11,000 officers and 250,000 enlisted men. They all pass through his desk. He is not a battleship admiral. He has never commanded a fleet. When the news of Pearl Harbor reaches Washington, Nimitz is at home with his wife, Catherine. He says almost nothing. She will remember the silence. For 9 days he keeps working at his desk. He does not know yet that a man named Frank Knox has flown to Hawaii. He does not know yet that Knox has stood on the burning shore, that Knox has counted the oil-blackened bodies pulled from the water, that Knox has looked into the eyes of survivors and seen something he cannot describe to the president. He does not know that Knox is on his way back to Washington, looking for someone to fix this. On the afternoon of December 16, 1941, Nimitz is summoned to the office of the Secretary of the Navy. Frank Knox is 67 years old. A Spanish-American war veteran, a Republican who serves a Democratic president because the country is at war. His face has aged in 9 days. The conversation lasts less than an hour. When Nimitz walks out, he carries with him the heaviest assignment in the history of the United States Navy. The decision had been made 1 floor above. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is 59 years old, a polio survivor in a wheelchair he hides from cameras. A man who has been president for nearly 9 years. He has spent the last week reading casualty lists. He has spent the last week looking at maps of the Pacific. He has not chosen the obvious man. On the seniority list of the United States Navy, there are 28 admirals who outrank Chester Nimitz. Roosevelt has passed over every one of them. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Harold Stark, is 61 years old. He does not approve. Stark has his own preferred candidate. He believes the new commander of the Pacific Fleet must come from the battleship line. He believes the carrier men are amateurs. He believes Nimitz is a personnel officer, not a warrior. Standing in the shadows behind Stark is a harder man. Admiral Ernest Joseph King is 63 years old. He has just been named Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet. On the 30th of December, in 2 weeks' time, the entire fighting navy will report to him. King is sharper than Stark. Crueler. He has spent his career on the bridges of cruisers and the flag decks of capital ships. He looks at Nimitz and sees a man who climbed through politics. A man who shuffles papers, a man too soft to fight. King has a name for officers like Nimitz. He calls them desk admirals. But the choice is not King's to make. Not yet. The choice is Roosevelt's, and Roosevelt sees something the admirals do not. In 1901, the Naval Academy at Annapolis is the dream of a German Texan boy who was rejected by West Point. Chester Nimitz enters Annapolis at 16. He graduates in 1905, 7th in a class of 114. He does not climb the battleship ladder. He climbs another ladder, a ladder no one wants, a ladder no one understands. He climbs the submarine ladder. In 1909, the United States submarine force is a joke. Gasoline-powered death traps, smoke, fumes, boats that surface to vent because the engines will suffocate the crew. Nimitz commands the USS Plunger, then the USS Snapper, then a flotilla of 5 boats. He goes to Germany, he studies diesel engines, he brings the technology back. He installs the United States Navy's first major marine diesel engines aboard the oiler USS Maumee. He serves as Chief of Staff to the commander of the Atlantic Submarine Force in the First World War. In the 1920s, he is sent to the Naval War College. There, on a polished wooden floor, he moves wooden ships across painted oceans. He wargames scenarios against an imagined enemy. The imagined enemy is Japan. For 2 decades, the United States Navy quietly studies the Pacific. They call it War Plan Orange. They simulate the conflict that everyone knows is coming. Nimitz is in those rooms. Nimitz moves those wooden ships. Nimitz learns how the Japanese think. He learns how they fight. He also designs the submarine base at Pearl Harbor itself. On December 7, 1941, the submarine base is one of the few facilities the Japanese leave untouched. Roosevelt knows all of this. The admirals do not. To Stark and King, Nimitz is the man who shuffles personnel files. To Roosevelt, Nimitz is the only senior officer in the Navy who has been preparing for this exact war for 20 years. Roosevelt gives Knox a message. The message has no military formality, no diplomatic softness. Knox writes it down and carries it to Nimitz in his office. The message is one sentence. Tell Nimitz to get the hell out to Pearl and don't come back until the war is won. On December 19th, Nimitz is promoted. 4 stars, a full admiral. That night he leaves Washington in civilian clothes. He travels by train across the country. From Washington to San Diego, 3.5 days of farmland, desert and silence. He carries no fanfare. He boards a PBY Catalina at North Island. The Catalina is a flying boat, slow, heavy, defenseless for this crossing. It takes off at dawn and flies for 15 hours across an ocean now haunted by Japanese submarines. The seas below are still littered with the wreckage of the merchant ships that vanished in the first weeks of the war. It lands in Pearl Harbor on Christmas Day 1941. Nimitz steps onto the dock in a wrinkled civilian suit, no uniform, no insignia, no honor guard. He is wet from the spray of the landing. He looks around. What he sees no peacetime man can prepare for. The oil is still burning on the water, not in patches, in sheets, rainbow slicks 2 miles across. The wreckage of the Oklahoma rises from the harbor at a 45-degree angle, her propellers black against the sky. The Arizona is a tomb, her superstructure twisted, her hull cracked, more than 1,000 men still inside. A young officer waits at the end of the dock to drive him to headquarters. Nimitz says nothing for a long time. Then he speaks 4 words. There is much to do. For 6 days he studies. He reads casualty reports, he reads damage reports, he reads the intelligence files that did not predict the attack, he meets the men who survived. He says little. On December 31st, 1941, he prepares for the change of command ceremony. By tradition, it should be held on the flagship of the Pacific Fleet. By tradition, it should be the USS Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania is in dry dock, holed and burned. By tradition, then, it should be any battleship in the harbor. Every battleship in the harbor is either sunk, capsized, or wrecked, so Nimitz makes a choice that in another time would have been a scandal. He holds the ceremony on a submarine, the USS Grayling, hull number SS-209, 307 feet of steel resting alongside the pier. The deck is narrow, there is barely room for the officers to stand. The flag must be raised on a temporary staff. That morning, Nimitz writes in his personal diary. He writes, "May the good Lord help and advise me, and may I have all the support I can get, for I will need it. I have still not reached the point where I can sleep well, because there is so much going on, and so much to do." The ceremony lasts a few minutes. Nimitz reads his orders aloud. He shakes the hand of Vice Admiral William Pye, who has held the command on an interim basis since Kimmel was relieved. He turns. He faces the men assembled on the pier. He says only what is required. The Pacific Fleet is now under his command. What remains of it? A burning harbor, a vanished battle line, a war already lost in the eyes of every senior admiral in Washington. And one rear admiral from a town in Texas that never saw the sea, the man nobody wanted, has just become the man on whom everything depends. For 3 days, the new commander of the Pacific Fleet says almost nothing. He walks the docks. He stands on the porch of the small command building on the hillside above the harbor. The rescue parties have stopped tapping on the hulls. Nobody is alive down there anymore. In the headquarters building above the harbor, the staff waits. They are the men who were here when the bombs fell. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton is 38 years old, a small man with sharp eyes. The fleet intelligence officer, the man whose job had been to know where the Japanese fleet would strike. On the morning of December 7th, he had not known. He had filed reports. He had warned that the Japanese carriers had gone silent on the radio. He had been ignored. Now he has packed a sea bag. He expects to be sent away to command a destroyer, or more likely to be quietly retired. Down in the basement of the administration building, in a windowless room behind a steel door, sits Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, 41 years old. The leader of a small unit called Station Hypo. Rochefort wears a red smoking jacket over his uniform. He wears carpet slippers. He has not seen sunlight in 3 days. He runs the men who are trying to read the Japanese naval code. They call themselves the Codebreakers. The rest of the Navy calls them lunatics. These are the men everyone in Washington believes should be fired. Admiral King has sent word from his new headquarters. Clean house. The American public is demanding answers. The newspapers are demanding scapegoats. The country has lost 3 battleships, 2,400 men, and any sense that it could defend its own territory. Someone must pay. Nimitz walks into the staff conference room. The officers stand. Several of them have not slept properly in weeks. He looks at them. He says, "I know each of you. As the former head of Navy personnel, I know your service records. The Bureau would not have assigned you to this staff if you were not known to be very good at your jobs." He pauses. "We have taken a tremendous wallop, but I have no doubt about the outcome. Nobody moves. Any man who wants a transfer can count on my assistance, but I hope most of you will stay." They stay. Every one of them stays. Layton unpacks his sea bag. Rochefort goes back to his basement. That night, Nimitz pulls Layton aside in his office. "I want you to be the Admiral Nagumo of my staff." Layton blinks. "I want your every thought, every instinct. I want you to be the Japanese commander sitting across the table from me. If you can do this, you will give me the information I need to win this war." Layton later writes that no other senior officer in the United States Navy had ever spoken to him that way. He had been told to report, he had been told to file, he had never been told to imagine. This is the first decision of the Pacific War that nobody in Washington understands. It will save the United States Navy. The battleship Admirals come next. They come from the West Coast. They come from the Atlantic Fleet. They come with their old maps and their old plans. They sit in Nimitz's office and they tell him, with the patience of men explaining the obvious to a child, what the Navy must now do. The battleships must be raised. The Arizona is gone, the Oklahoma is gone, but the California will float, the West Virginia will float. The Nevada has already been beached and can be patched. With time, with manpower, with the resources of the United States, the battle line can be rebuilt. And once the battle line is rebuilt, the United States can sail across the Pacific and meet the Imperial Japanese Navy in a great gunnery duel. The way the Navy has planned to fight for the last 40 years, the way the British fought the Germans at Jutland. Nimitz listens. He does not interrupt. When the battleship admirals are finished, he thanks them. He sends them away. Then he writes orders that in another age would have ended his career. He orders the carriers to attack, not to defend, not to wait, not to stand off and protect the islands while the battle line is rebuilt. To attack, in the middle of the worst defeat in American naval history, with 3 carriers and a handful of cruisers against the full fury of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Chester Nimitz tears up 40 years of doctrine. The battleship is dead. The carrier is the queen of the sea. He does not announce this. He does not write papers about it. He simply writes the orders, and the orders are obeyed. Years later, the surviving battleship admirals will say they did not understand what had happened until it was too late. The first strike comes on the 1st of February 1942. 2 task forces leave Pearl Harbor under blackout conditions. Task Force 8 carries the USS Enterprise. Her commander is Vice Admiral William Halsey, 59 years old, white-haired, hard-jawed, a man who chews tobacco on the bridge and curses the Japanese in every sentence. The newspapers call him Bull. His sailors love him. The Japanese will come to call him the most hated man in the Pacific. Task Force 17 carries the USS Yorktown. Her commander is Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, 56 years old, quiet, methodical. The opposite of Halsey in every way, the 2 forces split. Halsey drives north toward the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, Wutja, Malolap, the atolls the Japanese have held since the First World War. Fletcher drives south toward the Gilberts, Makin, Mili, Jaluit. At dawn on February 1st, the dive bombers come off the decks. For the first time since the war began, American aircraft attack Japanese soil. The damage is modest. A few transports sunk, an airfield cratered, a handful of Japanese aircraft destroyed on the ground. By the standards of the great battles to come, it is almost nothing, but the message is not in the damage. The message is in the act. For the first time, the United States Navy has gone forward. For the first time, the Japanese have been forced to look up. The pilots on Kwajalein, drinking their morning tea, hear the engines and see the white stars on the wings, and they understand, in that instant, that the war is no longer a parade. Halsey turns north and runs for Hawaii at 30 knots. The Japanese launch search aircraft. They cannot find him. He comes home to a hero's welcome. Crowds line the docks at Pearl Harbor. Sailors weep openly. The first good news in 2 months. Nimitz, on the dock waiting, says only, "Nicely done." Halsey grins. 3 weeks later, Halsey raids Wake Island. A week after that, Marcus Island, less than 1,000 miles from Tokyo. The Japanese begin to understand that something has changed. They cannot yet name what. On the 18th of April, 1942, Halsey returns to the Pacific, carrying something the Japanese will not believe. Lashed to the flight deck of the carrier USS Hornet, in defiance of every rule of carrier aviation, sit 16 Army Air Forces medium bombers. B-25 Mitchells, twin-engine, heavy, built to fly from concrete runways, not from the rolling deck of a ship. The plan was conceived in Washington and approved by Roosevelt himself. The commander of the bombers is Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, 45 years old, a pilot and engineer, a man who held some of the most famous speed records of the pre-war years. The carriers approach Japan in radio silence. 650 miles off the coast, a Japanese picket boat sights them. The element of surprise is gone. Doolittle decides to launch early. The B-25s claw their way off the Hornet, one at a time, in heavy weather. Every man on the flight deck holds his breath. There is no precedent for this. There is no manual. All 16 bombers make it into the air. Hours later, the bombs fall on Tokyo, on Yokohama, on Nagoya, on Kobe. The damage is light. The casualties are small. The shock is enormous. In the imperial palace, the emperor's advisors are silent for a long time. The home islands have been bombed. The home islands, the land of the gods, the bombers do not have the fuel to return to the carrier. They fly on to China. Most of them crash in the dark. 8 of the airmen are captured. 3 will be executed. In Pearl Harbor, Nimitz receives the news at his desk. He smokes a cigarette. He folds the message. He goes outside and pitches horseshoes for an hour. Pitching horseshoes is the one thing he does to keep his hands from shaking. He does it almost every day now. In Tokyo, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto reads the report and knows what he must do. Yamamoto is 58 years old, the architect of Pearl Harbor. A man who studied at Harvard, a man who has warned his own government for years that war with America is suicide. A man who has now started that war and is determined to win it before the Americans can wake up. The Doolittle raid has shamed him. The Emperor is in danger. The home islands are not safe. The American carriers must be destroyed. All of them, at once, in a single battle. Yamamoto chooses his target, a small atoll in the Central Pacific. 2 miles wide, a naval air station, a submarine refueling depot, a coral fence at the edge of the empire. Midway Island. He will draw the American carriers to Midway. He will crush them with 4 fleet carriers, the Akagi. The Kaga, the Soryu, the Hiryu, the same carriers that struck Pearl Harbor, the most experienced naval aviation force in the world. The plan is called Operation MI. It is the most complex naval operation in history, over 200 ships, 5 separate task forces. A diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands to draw American attention north, a timing so precise that any failure of communication could destroy everything. But before he can spring the trap, Yamamoto must clear the southern flank. In early May, 2 of his fleet carriers, the Shokaku and the Zuikaku, are detached for an operation in the Coral Sea, off the coast of New Guinea. Their mission is to support the invasion of Port Moresby, the Australian outpost from which the Allies might launch a counterattack. Fletcher meets them with the Lexington and the Yorktown. For 2 days, between the 7th and 8th of May, 2 fleets fight a battle in which not a single ship of either side ever sees the other. The aircraft go out, the aircraft come back. The Lexington takes torpedo and bomb hits, catches fire, and is scuttled by an American destroyer that same evening. The Yorktown is mauled, the Japanese light carrier Shoho is sunk in 10 minutes, the Shokaku is badly damaged, the Zuikaku's air group is shredded. When the smoke clears, both sides withdraw. The Japanese claim a tactical victory. They have sunk more tonnage than they have lost. But the strategic truth is darker for them. Port Moresby is not invaded, and 2 of the 6 fleet carriers Yamamoto needs for Midway will not be there. He does not yet know that this small subtraction will cost him everything. In a basement at Pearl Harbor, in a windowless room behind a steel door, Joseph Rochefort already knows what is coming next. The Japanese naval code is called JN25. It is a 5-digit code. Each 5-digit group represents a word, a phrase, a coordinate, a ship name. There are roughly 45,000 code groups. The Japanese change the cipher table every few months. The work of breaking it is impossible by any reasonable standard. Rochefort and his men have been doing the impossible since 1939. They are a strange group, linguists, mathematicians, crossword puzzle champions, jazz musicians from the band of a battleship that was sunk on December 7th. The Navy recruited them from universities and bandstands. Most have never been to sea. Most wear no uniforms in the basement. They work in 12-hour shifts. They sleep on cots. They drink coffee until their hands shake. By the spring of 1942, they are reading roughly 15% of Japanese naval traffic. It is enough. In April, a code group begins to appear with increasing frequency. AF is a target. AF is a location. AF is the place toward which the Japanese fleet is moving. Rochefort believes AF is Midway. Washington does not. In the offices of the Navy Department on Constitution Avenue, a rival code-breaking unit insists AF is somewhere else. The Aleutians, the Hawaiian Islands themselves, even the west coast of the United States. Admiral King is inclined to agree with Washington. Nimitz is inclined to agree with Rochefort, but inclination is not enough. Nimitz needs proof. A lieutenant commander named Jasper Holmes proposes a trick. The plan is so simple that for a moment no one believes it will work. Midway Island will broadcast a message in plain English, openly on a frequency the Japanese are known to monitor. The message will say that the desalination plant on Midway has broken down, that the garrison is short of fresh water. That seawater must be used for the laundry. The message is a lie. The desalination plant works perfectly. It is sent on the night of May 20th, 1942. For 2 days, nothing happens. On the morning of May 22nd, Station Hypo intercepts a Japanese transmission. The codebreakers work through the cipher tables. They write the translation on a single sheet of paper. The translation reads, "AF is short of fresh water." Rochefort takes the paper upstairs himself. He hands it to Nimitz. Nimitz reads it twice. He folds it. He places it in the breast pocket of his uniform jacket. He says quietly, "Now we know where the Japanese are coming." Within 24 hours, the message reaches Washington. Admiral King does not believe it. King is sitting in his headquarters on Constitution Avenue. He is convinced the Japanese are coming for the South Pacific. He is convinced they are after Australia. He is convinced that Rochefort's basement, the same basement that failed to predict Pearl Harbor, has now succeeded only in fooling itself. King sends word to Nimitz. He wants Pacific Fleet resources moved south. He wants the carriers in the Coral Sea region. He wants Midway left to its garrison and its handful of Marines. Nimitz reads the order at his desk in Pearl Harbor. He does not move. For 3 days he sends back queries, he sends back assessments, he sends back the raw intercepts. He has Leighton brief the admirals on what the Japanese are about to do. In Washington, King simmers. In Pearl Harbor, Nimitz holds his ground. On the 27th of May 1942, Nimitz signs an operations order. The order moves every operational carrier in the Pacific to a point northeast of Midway Island. A point Rochefort and Leighton have calculated to the mile. A point where, on the morning of the 4th of June, the American carriers will be waiting in ambush. The order is signed at 1200 hours. It is sent over the wire to Halsey, who is in a hospital bed in Pearl Harbor, scratching himself raw with shingles, unable to leave his cabin. Halsey reads the order. He swears for a full minute. He demands his pants. The doctors refuse. Halsey, sweating, fevered, the worst case of stress dermatitis the Navy has ever seen, recommends his own replacement. He recommends Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Spruance is 55 years old, a cruiser commander. He has never commanded a carrier in his life. He is the quietest officer in the Pacific Fleet. He reads books on philosophy in his cabin at night. He walks 5 miles a day on the cruiser deck for exercise. Nimitz accepts the recommendation. Spruance walks aboard the Enterprise, takes command of Task Force 16, and sails for Midway. Fletcher is already at sea with the patched-up Yorktown, repaired in 72 hours by the workmen at Pearl Harbor when the engineers said it would take 3 months. 3 carriers, 25 support ships, 233 aircraft, against 4 Japanese fleet carriers, 248 aircraft. Veterans of Pearl Harbor, veterans of Wake, veterans of the Indian Ocean, pilots who have not lost a battle in 6 months. In Pearl Harbor, Nimitz stands on the porch of his small house above the harbor. The sun is going down. He smokes a cigarette. He pitches horseshoes. His chief of staff comes out and asks him if he has any final orders. Nimitz says only this: "It will be a miracle if we win." The aide is silent. Then Nimitz turns and goes inside. In Washington, Admiral King is still convinced that his commander in the Pacific has made the wrong call. If Rochefort is wrong, if Leighton is wrong, if the intelligence is wrong, the United States will lose every remaining carrier in the Pacific. The road to the west coast will lie open, and Chester Nimitz, the desk admiral, the man Roosevelt chose over 28 others, the man who refused to fire the failures of Pearl Harbor, will be the man who lost the war. The trap is set. The Japanese are sailing. The morning of the 4th of June is 48 hours away, the morning of June 4th, 1942. In the grey pre-dawn light, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers turn into the wind 200 miles northwest of Midway, the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, the Hiryu. Together they launch 108 aircraft, bombers, torpedo planes, fighters, the most dangerous force afloat anywhere in the world. Their target is the airfield on Midway. They expect to destroy it in a single morning. They expect the American carriers will come up from Hawaii later in the day, sailing into a trap 1,000 miles wide. They do not know the American carriers are already here. The American carriers are 200 miles to the east. The Enterprise and the Hornet under Spruance, the Yorktown under Fletcher. Waiting, the flight decks loaded, the pilots eating their last hot breakfast, knowing some of them will not eat another. At 5:34 in the morning, a PBY Catalina out of Midway calls in the contact, many planes heading Midway bearing 320. Then, minutes later, enemy carriers. In the basement at Pearl Harbor, Rochefort has not slept in 2 days. He stands by the radio, smoking. His position has been confirmed. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Spruance gives the order to launch. Halsey, in a hospital bed 1,100 miles away, listens to the reports coming in. He cannot do anything. He stares at the ceiling. His fingernails are bloody from scratching. What follows over the next 4 hours is the most consequential morning in the history of naval warfare. The Japanese aircraft hit Midway and damaged the airfield. They return to their carriers. Bombs are brought up to rearm for a second strike against the island. Then comes the report Nagumo did not want to hear. American ships sighted, a carrier among them. Nagumo hesitates. He orders the bombs taken off and replaced with torpedoes for the carrier strike. His sailors run on the flight decks. Bombs come up from the magazines. Torpedoes come up beside them. Fuel hoses snake across the wooden planking. There has never been a more dangerous moment on a warship in history. Then the American torpedo planes arrive. They come in low and slow. Devastators, the slowest, most obsolete attack aircraft in the U.S. Navy. 15 aircraft of Torpedo Squadron 8, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron of the Hornet. They have no fighter escort. They have no chance. The Japanese Zeros tear them apart in minutes. Every plane goes down. Of 30 crewmen, only one survives. Ensign George Gay in the water, hiding under a floating seat cushion as the battle unfolds above him. 2 more torpedo squadrons follow. They die the same way. It seems for a moment that the Japanese are about to win. Then, at 10:20 in the morning, the dive bombers from the Enterprise and the Yorktown come out of the sun. They had been lost. They had been low on fuel. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey had decided, against the safer choice, to follow a single Japanese destroyer he saw racing northeast, gambling that it would lead him home to the carriers. It did. McCluskey comes down out of the clouds at 12,000 feet and sees the 4 flight decks below him. Crowded with aircraft, soaked in fuel, stacked with the bombs and torpedoes that the deck crews have not had time to put away. He pushes over. The first bomb hits the Akagi at 10:26. In the next 5 minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers are mortally wounded. The Akagi burns, the Kaga burns, the Soryu burns. The Hiryu, separated by a squall, survives long enough to launch a counterstrike. Her dive bombers find the Yorktown and hit her 3 times. Then her torpedo planes come in and hit her twice more. The Yorktown lists, her power fails. Captain Buckmaster orders her abandoned. That afternoon, the surviving American dive bombers find the Hiryu and burn her too. By sunset on the 4th of June, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers that struck Pearl Harbor are at the bottom of the Pacific. More than 2,500 Japanese sailors die. 248 aircraft are gone, the pilots who cannot be replaced. The mechanics who cannot be replaced, the cadre of an entire pre-war navy. The Americans lose the Yorktown, the destroyer Hammond, and 307 men. In Pearl Harbor, the message arrives at Nimitz's desk just before dark. He reads it twice, he folds it, he places it in his breast pocket next to the paper Rochefort had given him 11 days before. He says to no one in particular it was a victory of intelligence. He does not say it was a victory of his. He never will. 2 months later, Chester Nimitz learns what defeat tastes like. The American invasion of Guadalcanal has just begun. On the night of the 8th of August, 1942, a Japanese cruiser force under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa slips past the Allied screen near a small island called Savo. They open fire at point-blank range in the dark. In 32 minutes, 4 heavy cruisers go to the bottom, the Quincy. The Vincennes, the Astoria, the Australian Canberra, 1,077 Allied sailors die. It is the worst surface defeat the United States Navy has ever suffered in open battle. When the report reaches Nimitz, he sits at his desk for a long time. He does not pound the table. He does not pace. He does not call for resignations. He writes orders for a court of inquiry. Then he writes a letter that says in plain language that the responsibility for the disaster rests with the chain of command, which ends at his desk. He fires no one. When the senior officers gather, expecting blood, he tells them only this: the responsibility is shared, the failure will be studied, and no man who learned from this defeat will be punished for surviving it. Nobody asks for a transfer. The lessons of Savo are studied, the mistakes are catalogued, the training programs are rewritten. It will not happen again. A year passes. The war moves westward. The carriers raid the Marshalls and the Gilberts. The submarines tighten a noose around the Japanese home islands. The factories of Detroit and Chicago and Long Beach produce ships and planes and trained men at a rate that Yamamoto had warned his own admirals about years before and been ignored. In November of 1943, the United States Marines invade Tarawa Atoll. The 2nd Marine Division wades ashore at Betio Island. The tide is wrong. The landing craft snag on the reef. The Marines wade through chest-high water for 600 yards under Japanese machine guns. The water turns pink. In 76 hours the island is taken. 1,009 Marines are dead. More than 2,000 are wounded. Photographers send home pictures of bodies floating in the surf, of bodies lying in the sand, of bodies stacked along the seawall. The American public has never seen anything like it. The newspapers demand to know who is responsible. A few weeks later, Nimitz meets the press at his headquarters. He does not blame the tides. He does not blame the planners. He does not blame the Marines. He says simply that Tarawa cost more than it should have, that the planning was wanting, and that the responsibility is his. The Navy will learn from it. The reporters write it down. The senior admirals in Washington wince. No theater commander in the modern history of the United States has stood in front of a microphone and said such a thing. But the lessons of Tarawa, like the lessons of Savo, are studied, catalogued, applied. At Saipan, at Guam, at Tinian, at Peleliu, at Iwo Jima, at Okinawa, the landings improve. The casualties remain terrible, but the mistakes of Tarawa are not made again. The man from Fredericksburg, Texas, who had never seen the ocean as a boy, who had been chosen by Roosevelt over 28 admirals, who had refused to fire the failures of Pearl Harbor, builds the largest fighting force the seas have ever carried. 2 million men, 5,000 ships, 20,000 aircraft. It does not bear his name. It bears no one's name. He never asks for it to. On the morning of September 2nd, 1945, the USS Missouri lies at anchor in Tokyo Bay. She is a battleship, the very thing Nimitz had pronounced dead almost 4 years earlier, but this is no longer a battleship navy. The Missouri is a stage, a platform, a floor of teak above the water on which one war is to be ended. The Japanese delegation comes aboard at 8:56 in the morning, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu walking with a cane, his right leg lost to an assassin's bomb 13 years before. General Yoshijiro Umezu, his face like stone, 9 others behind them. General MacArthur speaks first, his voice carries across the deck. His words will be remembered for 100 years. Then Nimitz steps forward. He is 60 years old. His hair has gone white. His hands no longer shake. He has not needed to pitch horseshoes in months. He carries no notes. He makes no speech. He sits down at the small table on the deck. He takes the pen. He signs the instrument of surrender on behalf of the United States. 5 short pen strokes. He stands. He returns to his place behind MacArthur. He does not smile. He does not weep. In the distance, the bombers of the United States Army Air Forces and the fighters of the United States Navy fly low over Tokyo Bay. More than 1,000 aircraft. The sound of their engines is the loudest sound in the world. Somewhere in the ranks of the assembled American officers, an old submarine sailor weeps openly. Nimitz does not. He had said on December 31st, 1941, on the deck of the submarine Grayling, that there was much to do. It has all been done. 3 years and 8 months earlier, in Washington, Franklin Roosevelt had passed over 28 admirals to give him this job. Most of those 28 admirals are now retired. Some are dead. None of them ever commanded what Chester Nimitz commanded. The man nobody wanted has just signed the largest victory in the history of the United States Navy. He goes home a few months later. He walks the quiet streets of his neighborhood. He has dinner with his wife, Catherine. He pitches horseshoes in the yard. When reporters ask him why Roosevelt chose him, in the end, over all the others, he says only this: "I do not know." You will have to ask the president. Roosevelt has been dead for 5 months. The question goes with him. And the man who answered it, with everything he did and everything he never claimed, never spoke of it again.